There we go. All right. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So, Ethan, there's so many different things that we're going to be talking about with Ethan today, and I'm going to kind of break it down. But the first and foremost thing, I have to give Ethan his nickname. So, his nickname is going to be the ProAssisting Boss. We're going to break down what that is, what he does. But first and foremost, he's a fellow Sagittarius, and he's from New York. And I just met him, and I love him already. So, just start with that. Just get that out the way.
Love it.
So, now the floor is yours. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about you and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in upstate New York, 6 hours north of the city in a really small town, and kind of drove me crazy with being in a small town. Had to break out. Went to college in Boston at a specialty business school, Bentley University. And then immediately in 1996, right after school, moved to New York City. And the first job I got was as a production assistant on the movie Addicted Love. And then from there, I worked on a number of Hollywood pictures, both in television and in film. On the studio side of things, I worked as a production coordinator and production secretary. On the independent side of things, I worked as a dolly grip and best boy grip. And then I did a stint at William Morris in the mailroom agency, the oldest talent agency in the world. It's now owned by Endeavor. And from there went into USA Films, assisted the chairman there, then moved into advertising and, created this career as an executive assistant. And really, really wanted to be able to chase dreams outside of the office, music and writing scripts. And I wanted to be a director, and being an assistant really allowed me to do that outside of the office. And I had a very encouraging boss in that respect. But then you roll over and you're a career executive assistant after 25 years. And, so that kind of drove the ship. And then, my wife and I had a second son, move out of New York City. And now we're back home to the small hometown that I really liked growing up, but now I really love living here.
So, I mean, you brought up I guess you're southeast of Rochester, and I was looking up the general population of the city that you live in. So back in 2010, there were only 10,000 people in that population. So, I mean, growing up, you were really, even though people think New York is always big city, I mean, Northern New York is definitely a small town kind of feel to it. So I want to talk about how did you go from that small town feel to where you are right now? And I mean, obviously your journey going into big lights and cameras, going into an executive assistant, how did that transition?
Well, the interesting thing about Canandaigua is one of the Finger Lakes, and it sits at the north end of Canandaigua Lake. And given the proximity to Rochester, the population goes from about 15,000 people in the off season to about 35,000 people on season. And so, and you feel that in town, and there's a much different type of personality that comes into town in the summer. But in terms of, it's still a small town. I mean, I still a graduating class of 250 people. My dad owned a restaurant. My stepfather was an attorney. My mother was a teacher. I got caught for every bad thing I did because there's eyes everywhere, even when there weren't cameras. And so that's that loss of, there was zero anonymity. And I guess that's what drew me to big cities, was I really liked the idea of having anonymity, and found that in Boston, outside of Boston, meeting a completely new group of people. And then, you really find that when you move to a city like New York.
So, I mean, how did you get into marketing? Because I mean, obviously you went to school for marketing, you got a degree in marketing, you worked in marketing, but now you're doing more you're helping build startups. So I want to talk about how did that come in from a small town? What was the attraction to marketing?
Well, I'd just like to say we're building our business, and we're in our we're closing out our fifth year right now. So I don't know if I can use the term startup, even though I still want to. But the interesting thing is the entertainment industry really leverages the assistant position
Mhm.
as something that is where everybody earns their stripes. You know, pushing a mail cart, I was next to graduates of Yale Law School, Harvard Law School, um, Stanford MBAs who even used connections to get a job in the mailroom as an agent trainee. That's how like 60 to 70% of people get started in Hollywood.
Mhm.
And the thing was, my transition to advertising happened because the boss that I ended up working for in advertising went through 13 assistants in 1 year.
Mhm.
And they were looking for someone who had a thick skin, who moved fast and could win him over. And he enjoyed movies immensely. And so our first interview, we really hit it off there. And that was my transition into advertising. But I think the bigger thing is that as an assistant, whether you're an administrative assistant, an office assistant, or an executive assistant, a senior executive assistant, it's really a position that's industry agnostic.
Mhm.
And it's all about creating that relationship with your principal, or your boss, your client, and meeting their needs, being a chameleon to fit to their needs. So that's a really interesting thing, is that it was a very easy shift moving from entertainment to advertising. And then I eventually went from advertising to healthcare.
Mhm.
And I'm just a firm believer that being a top level executive assistant or an administrative assistant, it's a trade, and it can transcend industry.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and I think that that's a hell of a segue to like my next question. So for the listener, let's define like these abbreviations, right? So there's EA, there's PA, and there's VA. And I want you to kind of establish the differences between the three of them, and what are you and what do you do exactly?
Sure. So we'll start with EA, which stands for executive assistant. And um, the way I look at it is the difference between an executive assistant and a senior executive assistant is more along the lines of time. How long have you been doing it? It's a way for a company, a client, or a company or a principal to give you a title bump after you've been with them for so long. And when you're doing that at the highest level, and I'm talking about CEOs of companies that are doing a billion in revenue, or a hedge fund CEO, or the CEO of a fashion house, or the COO of an ad agency, um, really composes being that business partner, chief of staff, project manager, assistant, scheduler, and personal assistant. Uh, we can go into that, but I'll shift to PA now. And in entertainment, PA means production assistant. And that's someone who is a jack of all trades, there as someone who can run off and grab something quick, can be stationed somewhere, and their job is ever changing. In the business world, and in a where people can afford it, a personal assistant is someone who handles everything personal. Um, and that is something that falls under we feel under the title of executive assistant. Um, but a personal assistant could be a body man or a body woman who is traveling with you and interacting with everybody on your behalf. And again, creating that buffer, being that person that sits in between you and everyone else. Um, but that's personal assistant. And then virtual assistant, you know, when we moved to upstate New York from New York City, my wife got approached by a friend of ours. And she said, I know this consultant who works for Fortune 100 companies, travels the world, needs support, doesn't care where the support is, and doesn't need full time. Would you be interested? And she said, sure. And we started doing a deep dive. This was in 2017 on virtual assistants. And the term virtual assistant was really made famous by Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Work Week back in 2007. And his thesis was, I can hire a virtual assistant from the Philippines for $5 an hour to run my, you know, my online business, my book marketing and podcasts and, blogs and all of that. Um, and so that kind of stuck.
Mhm.
And so then companies in the United States sprung up where, they're charging $45 an hour for a virtual executive assistant. And I applied to one of those companies, and the largest one in the States. And they were like, Ethan, great. We want you to be one of our partners. We'll partner you with 8, 10, 12, 15 clients. Um, and we'll pay you $18 an hour. And when can you start?
Mhm.
And for both myself and Stephanie, career executive assistants making well into 6 figures, that just didn't align with either the compensation or the the idea that someone could handle 8, 10, 12 clients month in and month out successfully
Mhm.
in terms of the service that we provide. So that's where we created ProAssisting, and we consider ourselves remote executive assistants. And in that regard, we limit the number of assistants or number of clients that our assistants support to 3,
Mhm.
and we compensate them appropriately, um, based on their experience, and and a lot of it based on their emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, work ethic, the soft skills that really elevate the role. Does that cover, kind of give you the
Yeah.
overview?
Yeah. I think, I mean, for the listener, I think you definitely defined it really, really, really well. And I think you also gave us like another opportunity to talk about something in your personal life, right? It's not every day that you have a business that's successful up and running, but you have a co-founder that's your wife, Stephanie. So I want you to kind of talk about like, not only are you guys co-founders in this business, but you guys are also co-authors in a book as well. So like, and you guys probably have different personalities. And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys could be very similar as far as your business, but as far as like personalities, I would think you probably would be polar opposites. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to hear some more about that.
Oh yeah. Stephanie definitely rounds out my harder edges, and is the guardrails on me, because I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the idea guy. I'm coming up with all these ideas and what we want to do and what we can do, and she's very, very good at listening, listening to those ideas, acknowledging, and yet getting me to take a step back and take a beat. That also happens with um, when we're dealing with an issue with a client, or um, you know or an assistant, or a prospect. She's really, really good at that, and we balance each other out there immensely. So and the beautiful thing about our business is that we've been able to kind of really silo, and we have our own talents, if you will. So that really, it really makes it easier. It's not like we're sitting in the same room all day, and we do have things to talk about after hours, and things that she's done that day or I did, and so it's actually, working together like this has made our marriage so much stronger and better. Our communication is just through the roof. Um, yeah, so it's really great.
I think it's definitely interesting. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of structure in what you guys do. So it kind of leads me to like my next question is about your processes, right? I mean, you have like an onboarding process, you have introductions, you have status calls, continuing integrations, and you also define that it's white labeling. So I want to talk about like how do those pieces come together? And are you guys like sitting around like a round table throwing ideas and then making, like a scenario that what you both think would work best for the client?
We have processes, but we're always trying to say what's the easiest, what's the simplest.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times we see both in our work previously and with clients, sometimes they make processes just for processes sake, as opposed to really talking about what's the end goal and working backwards from there. Um, in terms of this on onboarding or starting clients, um, you know, we have a very simple process. It's one email with one client questionnaire with best practices, some questions to answer, and then we are very particular about who we partner with as our executive assistants, in
Mhm.
that they've done this a lot. They've onboarded clients or bosses a lot throughout their career. So this is nothing new to them. And we just try and make it as simple and frictionless as possible on the business side. And it's all about really getting them rolling and going with their assistant. And then I'm always there, and Stephanie's always there to provide coaching and talk things through if there's any questions or whatnot. But again, it's a really simple process. And I tell my clients, I said, you know, it starts the onboarding, that first onboarding call, you're just going to go through a ton of questions and they're going to gather a ton of information. But then really after that call, the work starts, and the amount of onboarding goes down, and the amount of work that's actually being done goes up. And I say when it's working good, 2 weeks in, you're going to be like, wow, this has felt like 2 months,
Mm.
and I can't believe we're going this far this fast. And part of that is that we create that one-on-one relationship, and we don't insert ourselves in between our clients and our assistants. It's we I guess, going back to my entertainment days, what we do is we are an agent for our executive assistants.
Mm.
And we're taking a 20% cut of the retainer, but 80% of that goes to our assistants, and which is unheard of. It's frankly unheard of in the remote space. And that's how we partner with exceptional assistants. And we can get into that if you like, but I went
Yeah.
off on a little tangent there, I mean.
No, I think this information is genuine good information, because I mean that's why I wanted to start off with like the definition, because people they hear about VAs, but they don't really know what an EA is, and you're really breaking it down to a level to where first of all it's layman, but they can comprehend the value proposition differently, right? So I mean obviously an EA is a higher value added than a standard VA, and that's what you're building up to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you that quick little thumbnail of what it looks like. And really it's since our assistants are limited to 3 clients,
Hmm.
the nature of executive assistant work is like this. Day, there's busy times and then there's quiet times. Busy times, quiet times, busy days, quiet days, busy weeks, quiet weeks, et cetera, et cetera. And so it leaves space for our assistants to feather in the work between each client every day. They are available to their clients Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's within an hour turnaround time on communication, and usually within 15 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, that allows for off the cuff phone calls for the client to just pick up the phone and call the assistant and say, hey, this changed for tomorrow. Can you update it, or what have you? And then we also provide support after hours on weekends in very atypical situations, or should the principal be traveling. And what that does is it really provides full service support,
Hmm.
and that feeling of full service support without being full time or a full time assistant. Now, we start at $3,000 a month. So for $36,000 a year, we're allowing our clients to have access to an assistant who could command $120,000 salary in New York City, um, but we're doing it fractionally. So, that's kind of what it looks like. You know, I think virtual assistants are great for a lot of things, and there are instances in your business where you should leverage that support. And I'm happy to talk to prospects and turn them in that direction I just know that we're not the right fit.
Mm.
But if you want that feeling of a true executive assistant remotely, kind of in the sky, if you will, that's our goal. That's what we provide.
Hmm. I think it's definitely it's a hell of a business model, and I think it's you're leveraging like assets to your point. You're fractionalizing them, right? So you may have one EA that's doing only three clients, but then you'll have maybe let's say 10, 20, 30, 40 EAs at scale. And you're talking about you're only eating 20% off top. I mean, you're doing a multiplication play, right? The more EAs that you have that are doing great work over a period of time, you could scale that, and it's infinitely you can scale it. There's no real limitations or cap. So let's talk about like the structuring like of your business. Are you more so kind of like a LLC, an S corp, a C corp? Like what flavor are you?
Actually, that's a pretty interesting question. Last year, we transitioned from an LLC to an S corp,
Okay.
and the reason we did that was because we got to a size where basically, if you're an LLC, then this is not legal advice, so don't take it as legal advice. But from our perspective, we looked at our business. We said, look, we're an LLC. We're paying FICA on all of our money coming through. And so, Mark Kohler is this accountant on the internet who I watched a ton of his stuff. And then I started talking to attorney friends of mine and accountant friends of mine. And they're like, yeah, you transition to an S Corp, you pay you and your wife a W-2. And then after that is taken out, you're only paying your income tax on the pass through money as opposed to FICA on all of it. It also gave us an opportunity to start a solo 401k, even though, well, you can start a solo 401k on an LLC as well, and and grow your retirement
Mhm.
in a significant way. So we made that transition last year, and so now we're ProAssisting Inc. as opposed to an LLC, and a little bit more hoops to jump through.
Mhm.
Something I think you want to do when you start getting to a revenue level and an EBITDA level where it makes sense, and you have some money to actually do the process. It's not hugely expensive, but just some things to think about. When I think about our remote executive assistants who are independent contractors and we work them through that process,
Mhm.
the LLC is the best way to go initially. And it's very easy, it's very inexpensive to, even if you're living in a state like New York, you're still probably only paying $300 to get an LLC up and running. Um, and so that's another part of our business where I do a lot of coaching with our assistants on how to work through that, how to account for taxes, what are business expenses. Again, not as accounting advice, but just things that they need to keep track of and ask their accountant so they're staying on top of their business. Um, I think for me being an entrepreneur, it was very exciting. But
Yeah.
for a normal person who's a W-2 employee, considering making the transition to their own business, it can be very intimidating. And it's not hard. It's just you have to learn and understand the process. What's interesting is that we are starting to seriously think this year about starting a side of our business that focuses on our assistants and training
Mhm.
assistants how that would look in terms of taking their trade of being an assistant and starting a business. And the best thing, we didn't throw a dart into the dartboard and say, which is the best business to start. We started with a business that both Stephanie and I were experts in and
Mhm.
lived for 20 plus years, 25 plus years. And so many people I think don't recognize how valuable their W-2 job is from the perspective of someone outside looking in,
Mhm.
and how to either productize that or make it a service that can be almost profitable from day one.
I think it's a hella philosophy, right? So I mean, you're talking about potentially starting up like some variation of education for your current executive assistants. So, like this next question is kind of like I'm playing devil's advocate here, right? So, are you going to be training them ideally to become more of like your partners? Because again, you're going to be giving them insight, entrepreneurial information, which can easily convert an employee to competition, or are you trying to convert that employee into partnerships?
They're not employees. They are independent contractors for us.
Mhm.
Um, we do not have employees, and the reason we have them create an LLC is because they are starting their own business, and we have a number of assistants who have one client of ours, or maybe two, and they're not full, and they're full with work outside of us.
Mm.
I've coached some of our assistants on how to close clients on their own,
Mm.
how to think about pricing, how to there's so much workout business out there, that it I I also have to be very upfront with our assistants when we bring them on and say, I can't guarantee you that we're going to get you one client in one month one, a second client in month two, and a third client in month three. I don't know. We have to have the clients coming in, the prospects coming in. There is a little bit of seasonality to our business that we're learning now after 5 years. And so there is risk on their side, and I'm all for them um, hanging their own shingle. I want them to have their own shingle. And use us as a foundation to launch that business of theirs. Um, yeah, I really appreciate the question though. It just is in our business model, they understand that they're taking that risk when
Mhm.
they partner with us. Um, and, in terms of how our model works, the goal is to create a nice lifestyle where, they can do what they do and they can move away from the major metropolitan areas, totally change their socioeconomic setting, and yet still be paid commensurate with that experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's flawless. It's definitely very interesting. And I can tell that you've been doing it long enough that you thought through the variables, right? Because sometimes people just jump in and just saying that, Mike told me to do this because he's done it, but like, no, you've lived through it. You've lived through it. So like you're setting the example and you're guiding them in the right direction. So for anyone that's a 1099 employee that's making that connection with their actual employer per se, I think that's a great partnership to have. Um,
Yeah. And I sometimes I advise against an assistant partnering with us, even though I want them to.
mhm,
Just because whether they're, I talk to assistants who are making $150,000 a year. And if their lifestyle has crept up to fill that kind of salary, we're not there. We're not able to provide them with three clients to get them there. Now, I can provide them with one for them to start, and then they can go out and leverage their network and find people that they've worked with and get back up to that level. But um, you know, so sometimes I advise against it.
mhm. So well, let's flip this up a little bit, right? So let's say if Stephanie was sitting down next to you right now, and I would ask her, what is 3 to 5 words to define Ethan? What do you think she would say to define you?
Creative, passionate. She would say that my first reaction is always no.
Mm.
um, Meaning like, I think we should get a dog. No. And then 2 months later, it's like, yeah, we should get a dog. um, I would say communicative.
Mhm.
And I would also think she may say that I am able to have difficult conversations in an empathetic way. Um,
I think that's definitely
Hopefully
interesting.
cute or hot.
Well, the empathy is definitely interesting. I mean, because like both of us are both Sagittarius, and it's just kind of like every Sagittarius that I've met, including myself, like empathy is something that we have, but when we're head fast and focused on whatever the end result is, it's kind of like, you know, certain things kind of go out the window. So I want you to kind of talk about like, have you always been that empathetic, or is that something that you've grown into as you gotten older?
Well, there was a pivotal moment in my career. And it was when I started working for the ad agency and for that very difficult boss. And after a year, I won him over.
Mm,
I stuck it out. I won him over. He was so intelligent, so fast, wasn't afraid to yell, wasn't afraid to swear. Everybody was afraid of him. And for some reason, we got through that first year and I won him over. But that combined with my entertainment experience as an executive assistant and as a production assistant in that pretty heady space and world, a lot of sharp elbows are thrown.
mhm.
And um, my very difficult boss at the ad agency turned out to be my favorite boss I've ever had.
Wow.
And after 4 years, he moved on, and he wasn't allowed to take me with him for a non-compete reason. And the chief operating officer of the agency, she took me under her wing, and she is also amazing boss. The two of them are my two favorite most, well, there's one other, but just really, 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 really great bosses. And after working for her for a year, the agency had gone from being led by these brash, outspoken men to being led by these brash, considerate, open, extremely intelligent women. And during my review that year, my boss said to me, she's like, you suffer fools lightly. And what she meant by that was, when we have a new business pitch or a client work has to go out, and someone isn't moving at the speed that I wanted them to, I was not afraid to tell them, get your butt in gear. Let's
Mm,
go. I need this. This is not, I'm not, this is work. We got to get this done. And, we had a lot of younger folks coming up into the agency, and she said the younger generation just doesn't react to that well. Um, isn't programmed to handle that well, and people are scared of you.
mm,
And so I went home, talked to Stephanie, and being Sagittarius, I think we're very sensitive, and we are, at least I am, and I think on things, and things weigh on me. And I really took that conversation to heart,
mm,
and I started to think about the role of being an assistant, and it's really to serve. And I really changed my mental position. And over the next couple of months, I had some conversations with some people I had a run in with. And I said, hey, I still feel bad about saying X, Y, and Z back when. And I smoothed a lot of relationships over. I changed how I dealt with new employees coming in and really softened my elbows and trying to get to that place of being a modern assistant,
mhm,
someone who is, you know, um, you know, really looked to, has a sense of high touch hospitality. Thinking back to working in my father's restaurant and the hospitality that we talked about way back then when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. I think part of that too was I'm a straight male executive assistant.
mhm,
There's like 16 of us across the country. And, and I think part was, was ashamed of doing that role and being in that place. And so that review from her started the process of me looking at myself, looking at what my role was within the company and how I could do it better. And that was becoming more empathetic. And in a lot of instances beyond then, it was hiding or covering for my boss's sharp elbows and being the person of reason and whatnot. Because when she told me that, she says, I'm the same way. She's like, I suffer fools lightly too. And she's like, you remember Fred, the boss that I had, who was the hard boss, he
Yeah.
was her mentor. And she said, Fred's told me the same thing. It's just that we just got to be conscientious of it. And that really set me on a path to review or rethink what the assistant role was. And what was interesting is Stephanie was doing the same thing that I was doing, but doing it for hedge fund CEOs and the CEO of J. Crew and whatnot. And that just came naturally to her. That's her MO, is not to throw elbows. Her MO is to, come on, we can get this done. And this is a good thing. And so I guess that's where I pinpoint it back to.
Mhm.
And that's become a cornerstone of ProAssisting and how we view and what I look for in a great executive assistant who we want to partner with.
Hmm. So, I mean, obviously, the definition of what you're stating is that you're a seasoned vet in what you do, right? And I want you to kind of talk about like how long did it take you to become this seasoned individual? Did you, I mean, you have to be conscious of it at some period of time. So was it like a 10-year of on that treadmill, or was it 15, 20 years? How long did it take you to get to where you are right
The hard skills, the technical skills of, really managing lines of communication, email, contacts, calendar, computer program systems, and all of, making sure things aren't falling through the cracks, and agendas and travel arrangement, all that stuff is, you know, the mother you know, of a 5-kid household does that stuff all the time.
now?
So I think in terms of the hard skills, not that long. If you're conscientious and you have a work ethic and you believe or you care about your work product, you keep score. Um, those hard things aren't that hard. It's the soft skills and the trust that you build up with your principal. And in that regard, it's a two-way street. You can have a principal that doesn't share information with you, that doesn't want you to do things, or um, keeps him, keeps you in the dark, doesn't include you where it would be nice if they did, and that can really hinder your growth. Or you can have a principal who gives you everything. And a unique story about that is Stephanie was working for the CEO of a hedge fund um, for 7 years, 8 years. And in year two, he held a meeting, and it was with an architect, it was with a general contractor, and it was with a project manager about building out a $20 million estate on the coast of Connecticut.
Mm,
And he called Stephanie into the room and said to each person sitting there, the architect, general contractor, project manager, this is Stephanie. She's my executive assistant. You're going to be dealing with her.
mm,
She is going to filter the information to me at the best time for me to make decisions. If she says something or asks you a question, consider it coming from me. Now, she built that rapport up with him in a year for him to be able to trust her with that, um, because he saw how great she was. But that's just the kind of guy he was. He didn't want to micromanage. He was time arbitraging. And that is, um, especially as we've during COVID and beyond. And I have seen from our clients time and time again is that it shifted from having the most absolute highest successful business possible to time arbitraging. And we are part of that puzzle in what we do. So in terms of timeline, how long does it take you? What does the hard skills happen It can happen really quickly. Or if you're just very organized, if you have inbox zero on your personal inbox and your calendar is up to date with your eye appointment that's happening 3 months from now, and your trip to Aruba that's happening next week, you can use those skills and be an assistant. It's
Mm,
more about the mental place of where you want to be, and how to think about the difference between service and hospitality, how to create rapport with both a principal, but also everybody who you interact with on behalf of that principal. And that takes time, but with someone like Stephanie, it happened naturally and quickly. With me, coming from the hard knocks of working in entertainment and then a really hard advertising environment, it happened more slowly because of the environment.
mm, mm. I think that that's a phenomenal answer, right? And it kind of leads me into like being that you saying in the beginning, things were a little bit rockier per se than what they are right now. You had to kind of iron things out. If time travel was a real thing and you had an opportunity to go back anywhere on your journey, when would you want to go back to, and what would you like to change if you could?
Well, both Stephanie and I, we've talked about it a lot. We practice gratitude. We are so thrilled with where we are right now. We just feel blessed that we got to be where we are. But and I say that just because my answer totally blows that to smithereens. In that, I still have a story in me and a script, and I still want to direct, and I still want to chase that dream. I still think at one point I'll be able to get there. And I'm turning 50 this year. So just interesting stuff. And so if I could go back to when I was assisting the chairman of USA Films, he was working under Barry Diller, and Barry Diller owned USA Films under the USA Network Center. And we had made Traffic, the movie that won the Academy Award that year from Steven Soderbergh. And I was his second assistant. And after 6 months, actually after 9 months, he had to let me go because Barry Diller said, we're tightening the belt, and you got to cut 60% of your overhead. And I was in New York, and he was just like, we just got to let you go. If I had to do it over again, I always wonder what it would have been like if I actually at that moment moved to Los Angeles
Mm,
and leveraged that experience from William Morris and USA Films into an assisting role or writer's room role, to continue down that path. So
mm.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to like the root, right? I mean, we're kind of documenting your story. And in the beginning, you're talking about your keywords were being creative. A word that you use over and over again was entertainment, which kind of leads me into like the music space. Now, those that have followed you on the internet or after this call, they should definitely go and what I'm about to bring to fruition, go and check out some of these video clips. But there was a video clip with you, and I think this one was on Facebook, and it was a Miller Lite can, and it was you on a guitar, and you were playing the hell out the guitar, and at the end you were singing, and then you close it out with whistling. So I think the showman in you've done multiple different videos like that. Is that something that you do to kind of leverage to keep you in tune with the entertainment and the creativity?
I mean, just music is an amazing outlet. I've been singing since I was in seventh grade. Uh, and when I hadn't picked up an instrument, and I went off to college, and a couple of my friends were musicians, or not my new friends, and they were jamming. And I get home from college, again, moving from Boston back to this upstate town where I didn't want to be. I didn't want to come back,
Mhm.
between my freshman and sophomore year. I was miserable. And my mother said, what if we got you a keyboard and some piano lessons. And you know, with my ear and those lessons and just practicing like 6 hours a day every day all through the summer, learning my triads, my chords, learning the progressions, learning some songs, starting to get my voice back into it and being able to sing and play that way, and getting a microphone. And then I went back after 2 months, 3 months, and I sat down with those guys. I'm like, all right, let's jam. And they're like, where, how did you learned how to play? I'm like, yeah, what are you playing? Like, and I'm like, what are the chords? And they threw out the chords, and I kept up, and that really started the journey. And then the following year, or that year, a friend of mine moved back after studying abroad in Australia into our room, our apartment, and he had a guitar. And then I started transitioning what I learned on the piano to the guitar, and then as well as percussion. And I'm naturally rhythmic. I have an ear, and so I picked that up, and it just went from there. And while I was working in New York City, I ran an open mic for a few years on Thursday nights, and it actually it was Wednesday nights, and it was I mean, working a 9 to 5 gig and then running an open mic is, and you're out until 2 in the morning, and then it wore on you. But again, another great experience. I've recently gotten back into piano, and but honestly, music a little bit over the last a year and a half has fallen more towards the side, as the business has been taking a lot of my mental space and creativity. You can be creative in business. It is, again, something I draw on. But I always look at music as something I'll always have and I'll always turn to at different seasons in my life. But yeah, that song you're mentioning, covering Dave Matthews, playing 41, um, it's a hard song to play, but love Dave Matthews, and then playing piano and whatnot. It's a great creative, having a creative outlet like that, whether you're a writer, you're writing poems, or you're a painter, or you're it only is positive. I think so. Yeah.
Well, I think genetically you've also passed it on, and correct me if I say his name wrong, but I think your son, his name is Wyatt. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So he's also a pianist as well. So like I think you kind of passed that torch. Are you talking to him and influencing him? Because I mean, he's done a couple like performances. Like, how is he holding on
Oh,
to like that
love it.
musical, like
Yeah, yeah, your research is really top notch. So this is kind of interesting. This can get into how we look at parenting a little bit, but Wyatt came home in fourth grade, all right, fifth grade, fourth grade, and said, I'm going to play an instrument. And um, he says, I'm going to play the flute.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay. Now, as a musician, and this may not be a popular opinion, but as a musician, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around a a student in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, playing the flute, playing the viola, playing the clarinet. I, and maybe a fault of mine, I really believe that you should be focusing on the piano, or the drums, and or singing, to really see and feel if there's an aptitude, and instead of um, forcing an instrument that is not natural to you, and obviously not natural to your child, and forcing them to practice and do it. It just it just didn't it I wasn't open to it. And so um, I suggested, I said, hey, instead of doing the flute, what would you feel about doing the piano and starting there? And then if you like the piano and you want to try the flute, we can go there. And he had seen me play, obviously, and been in the house and all of that. And so getting him to do piano was great. And he did that first year, and we stayed on him about practicing, but we didn't push it too hard.
Mm,
Um, and my whole thing is I want to see him want to practice. So the second year comes along, and he was like, you know, oh, I was like, look, we had a couple of blow ups about you not practicing. And if you want to keep doing piano, I am not going to force you to practice. I'm
mm,
not going to do this. And you have to take that responsibility on yourself and put that time in if you want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Don't play the piano because of me.
mm,
And he said, no, I want to keep playing. I'm like, okay. And from that time on, we haven't fought about him practicing.
mm,
He just comes in and sets his timer for 20 minutes a day and sits down and practices. And he's gotten better and better and better. He can read but music better than I can. Um, and I have started to make small suggestions. Like last night, he was sitting here practicing right over my shoulder, and he ended on a note. And I said, okay, Wyatt, go 4 octaves down and hit staccato that note. And he went 4 octaves down and went, hit it. And then he goes, but that wasn't written on the page.
mm,
And I said, well, you know, Wyatt, the thing with music is if you're staying within the confines of a piece of music, you do have the ability to hit that note, even though it's not written on the page, and it will sound good and it will feel complete
mm.
and an ending. And he's like, okay. So little things like that. But I mean, he is so disciplined. Um, I mean, his grades are off the chart. Uh, but he understands a couple of things in our household. If you want to get good at something, you've got to practice. There's no
Mm.
getting around it. And 20 minutes a day on anything in a year, you're going to be so much better at whatever it is you were doing for 20 minutes a day. Um, as well as there's responsibility. It's a responsibility to brush your teeth. It's a responsibility to take the garbage out. It's a responsibility to feed the dog. And the goal in life in the Bull household is to have as much fun as possible while meeting all of your responsibilities.
Mhm.
And if you can do that, hey, we're going to have a lot of fun. So
I could almost hear you stating like that scenario to your 1099 employee partners, like the tonality of the way you're talking and you're delivering. I could totally see you having like a virtual meeting and you're delivering in that same tone. And correct me if I'm wrong, but have you done that before? Have you talking to them like almost like their family before?
oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. And it's all one-on-one.
Mm,
I have all one-on-one conversations. Stephanie has one-on-one conversations with our assistants at times. I take the majority of that because I've been leading teams of assistants for a long time now. And that's where that really I try and be empathetic in terms of having when there's a difficult conversation to be had,
mm,
or also being pragmatic and you know, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, you know? So let's not blow things out of proportion. Let's take this step by step. And yeah, and I really really enjoy that part of our business and what we do. um and that's why, you know, this certification slash training program, while it is built for our current assistants, we also want to be offering that to assistants who maybe don't align directly with being a pro assisting assistant, but could do what they do and potentially make more money than they're currently making by by taking our mentorship and our coaching and our help and chopping that learning curve down very quickly in the three parts. The three part, one is career, one is life, and one is business. And, you know, the career is what you've built to this point. The life is, let's get your life in order so you're ready to make a transition should it happen, either at your own choosing or not at your own choosing if you get let go. And then the business aspect is, how do you set up a business? What tools do you use? And it's almost like that's the easiest part, but
Mhm.
it's also the scariest because people aren't familiar with it.
I think I think earlier on you had brought up the 4 hour work week, and it kind of leads me into like time management. We talked about time management before, but the titling of your book, like it's called the 29th workday, 29-hour workday. So I want you to kind of talk about, like, was that like a play on the numbers? Why 29? Why 5 hours over the extra 24 hours? Like, what is the symbolism behind that?
Um, when you pick a title for a book, it's not fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's stressful. You want to get it right. We were fortunate enough to be working with a consultant, and she was, you know, spending time with us, and it ended up happening rather quickly.
Hmm.
Um, and the extra the extra 5 hours relates to the 5 performance multipliers
Hmm.
of what a great executive assistant does. And those are around, which I said earlier: business partner, chief of staff, project manager, assistant slash scheduler,
Hmm.
and personal assistant. So that was the play on words. We weren't shying away from the fact that it is a little bit of a take on the Tim Ferriss book. Um, but and we thought it would make people stop and ask that exact question.
Perfect, perfect. So that kind of leads me into, like, let's say we're cracking open the spine, and right away, I mean, you guys got into like the storytelling, right? You was talking about the toast and the raspberry jam, and the person being kind of like, "What the hell's going on? I can't start my morning without the jam." Like, you would not think an executive book would start off with storytelling like that. So I want to know, like, who's the storyteller in the family? Is it Steph or is it you? Because I mean, obviously that story was well told.
Um, you know, we I'll be we leveraged a company called Scribe that really helps in terms of pulling a book like this out. I've written 12 screenplays. I have a published graphic novel that I also wrote the script for, and we got close on that one. So I understand how hard the process is to write something and the amount of time and effort. And so we engaged a company to help us. And that story is all me and all mine in terms of being personal assistant to Nastasia Kinski on the film Town and Country when she was shooting here in New York. 4:30 call time. Um, had to get her to set. Uh, you know, got her out. Knew exactly what I needed in terms of what she wanted to eat, except the raspberry jam. They didn't include it in the breakfast. Um, Mind you, it was a 5-star hotel, and they knew to include it, but they didn't. And so, and ended up getting the jam. And but she told the teamster to leave without me, yada yada yada. And the director and the producers got a big kick out of that story, and that Nastasia was like, ditch the assistant, let's go. And actually that was my first day working for her. So um our relationship was built there, and she actually laughed along with them. So um but how that process worked for the book was, you know, we were working with a scribe, and hours and hours and hours of conversations, and developing an outline, and transcribing all of our conversations, and then pulling it all together. And that was a great way to illustrate the breadth of what a great assistant can do. and something that a lot of people may not think of
Mhm.
or associate with great hospitality, high touch hospitality, taking something that's a service done to you and doing something that actually makes you feel something, and uh, that is from the restaurateur Bobby Stuckey. And really, that story illustrates that idea behind what a executive assistant does for the principal.
I think it's definitely interesting because I mean, at the end of that story, you made like a hell of an analogy, right? So whoever like watches Marvel superheroes, they're very familiar with Iron Man, and Pepper Pot is essentially a representation of who you guys are and what you do. And obviously, she turns out to be a superhero at the end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So with that being said, let's say there's a version of Pepper listening right now. That is your ideal avatar. That's who you're communicating with. What words of insight would you want to leave for her to help her to transition from just being a standard assistant to becoming into a superhero?
I mean, if I was talking to Pepper Potts right now, the first words out of my mouth would be thank you. um, you know, uh, it, I'm not transitioning Pepper into a superhero. I guess let me answer it this way. If I had to take a really good executive assistant and make them into an exceptional executive assistant, it really would be around digging deeper
Mhm.
on the soft skills, because you're not considered a great executive assistant if you're screwing up calendar invites and you're sending people to the wrong place and you're booking travel all wrong. All that stuff is those boxes already been checked.
Mhm.
It's more along the lines of, if you're a good executive assistant, you're providing a service. If you're a great or exceptional executive assistant, you're providing hospitality.
Mhm.
And and that hospitality can come in any number of forms. And the interpersonal skills that go along with that um, are the thing about interpersonal skills is that um, you can hear something 1,000 times, like um, you know don't interrupt someone when they're talking, you know um, and it's such an easy change to make, but sometimes it takes you 1,000 times to quiet your inner voice, quiet your nerves, and be comfortable in the silence,
Mhm.
and not interrupt someone's train of thought. Um, and so while making the change is easy, it can also be very hard
Mhm.
at the same time. And it's those little things. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, just so you know, and everybody listening, I mean, I still work 2 clients. I still have 2 clients, and I've been with them for 5 years, since inception of the business, and they're wonderful. And but it's I try and provide high touch hospitality to them all the time, and so in terms, well, there's a video on our website where we talk about high touch hospitality, and an easy example is this couple goes into a restaurant, and whenever they go in there a lot, so people know them, the waiters know them. Whenever there's a bone-in fillet, the mister always orders the bone-in fillet and loves it, raves about it, sends people there. Fantastic. um, if a server saw, or let's say the host says, okay, Mr. Smith's coming in today, and then, oh, we have a bone-in fillet, but he's not coming in until 8 tonight. We're probably going to be run out by then. He'll go into the back, take a bone-in fillet, tell the chef, hold this for Mr. Smith, I will tell you when he arrives. And that is taking something that you have detailed information about, and then transferring that into elevating the service you have to hospitality.
Mhm.
And executive assistants have all of that information.
Mhm.
and we gather it over time. And we don't charge by the hour at ProAssisting. And the main reason is because all of the legacy knowledge, personal, business, family, community, that we gather, there's value in us holding that information. And if we can hold all that information and something comes across our desk and something out of that information pops up and we say, whoa, 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 this isn't work. This isn't going to work. I know this isn't going to work. She's not going to want to do this, or we need to change this. And if you can do it even without the principal knowing and still take joy in the fact of how you did that without getting the praise because the principal doesn't know,
Mm.
I mean, that um, internal pat on the back, if you will, is really important. And so when you're leveling up to that game and you don't need praise, but you are trying to take all information you have, just like Pepper, she knows all. And so, and she's guiding the pieces on the chessboard based on that information. And the thing is, there's huge value in that, huge. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that when they're talking dollars per hours.
So, I mean, I think that's a phenomenal approach, right? So an executive is listening to this podcast right now, and they're hearing that it's not necessarily about you having the external gratitude, you having the internal gratitude by satisfying the requirements and needs of that executive. How does that person get in contact with you? What website did they go to? Do they send you an email address? Because obviously, hearing you speak, it's a clear distinction between all the different assistants, right? And that's why your price point is what it is. And again, you're introducing not just the functionality of executing the work, but you're also including what you do with hospitality. So, where does someone find you?
Our website is proassisting.com. I personally am active on LinkedIn. Stephanie is on LinkedIn. Ethan Bull, Stephanie Bull. ProAssisting has a page on LinkedIn. There is a free consultation on our site. Anybody can book a call. And, I really look at those consultations as doing a deep dive on what the prospect needs. And I, we are month to month, and in terms of our agreement, and we did that for a specific reason, is that we don't want to lock someone into a long-term agreement. Um, and if we're not providing value. And so on our consultation calls, I want to get down to what are the needs and are they aligned with our service? And if they're not aligned with our service, which service or avenue for support is best for them? It's, I can't tell you how many clients have come to us and said, yeah, John sent me because all he needed was a virtual assistant, but he said he so liked the fact that you did not want to partner with him because he needed a virtual assistant and not what you guys do. But I need what you guys do. And so that's what we do. It's just a simple book a call, and we have a call. It's a very simple process. Book a call. If we're aligned and we have a great assistant who I think is going to be a great fit, we send you an agreement. You sign the agreement, and if nothing comes of it, the agreement comes null and void. But that agreement allows us to feel comfortable introducing you to one of our assistants. And then you have an intro call. And how does it feel? What questions do you have? And then if it's go, we send a welcome email, set a kickoff date, and you're off and running. And again, based on what I've seen, I just personally, I like a simple process. I don't like to go deep on and do work for the sake of work. It's, you're going to know real quick if we're the right fit and if your assistant's the right fit. And yeah. And the one thing I would caution everyone is that what we've been talking about here is pretty high level, and it doesn't happen overnight. and it takes time to onboard someone. And you have to realize that you may have to walk someone through on Zoom and record what you're doing so they can see it and follow it. And it may take longer to do some of those things than it normally would. But the whole goal is for you to never have to do them again.
Mhm.
And the time that that compounds, as you go month after month after month, will more than make up for the amount of time that you spent in the onboarding process. So we are a person to person business. It's not a software platform, and we're not robots. And so there just has to be that, there has to be that expectation.
Mhm.
And the goal is to get to know, like, and trust. Do you know, like, and trust your assistant? And does your assistant know, like, and trust you? Because if that relationship is working, we'll walk in front of a bus for you.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, that's the like, and I'm saying this facetiously to just mess with you, but I was saying if that was a sales pitch, finishing it with that line saying that we will walk in front of a bus for you, that is one hell of a tagline. Like literally, if you're not using it, go ahead and put that in some kind of
we're,
marketing material now.
we're not. But yeah, that's not a bad idea. I'll think
Yeah.
about that one.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into like a couple fun bonus questions, and this question is a question that I'm going to tell you right now. You cannot use Stephanie as an answer for this question. So
Okay.
I'm going to remove her from the equation because I just see that bond and that unity between both of y'all. So the question is, if you could spend 24 hours with anyone, and this person could be dead or alive, and you have an opportunity to spend 24 hours with them, who would it be and why?
Hmm. Pick the day that I'm spending with them too.
It's up to you. I mean, you have a 24-hour window. It could be anytime, anywhere, with anyone. I mean, I could play Jeopardy music, or I can play your song while you think in the background.
Yeah, my song. I guess I would have to say 24 hours. I'd probably have to say, like, I'd probably go like Steven Spielberg,
Mm,
the day of the first table read for E.T.
wow, that's highly detailed. So why? I mean, Steven, I get it because that based upon your personality, but why ET considering everything else he's done?
I, it, there's so much heart in that movie.
Yeah.
And it hit me at a time in my life where, I actually knew that it was such a great movie. Um, but you really could take any number of his movies, and going to the table read uh would be just to try and find a 24-hour period where I'm going to learn the most about
Mm,
how he thinks, works, and acts. um Seriously, making a movie is like watching paint dry. So being on set with him, while would be wonderful, you're only going to shoot a page and a half. And whereas the table read, you're going to see the whole story from start to finish, and really see how he leads everyone through that process.
mhm, mm. Definitely interesting. So I mean, this next question kind of feeds off of like what you had said earlier about if time travel was real, right? Now, obviously, there's always a fork in the road, but you've had significant achievements on the fork that you've selected to go down. So, what is your most significant achievement to date?
um well, personally, it's being able to convince my wife to go out with me and then marry me. But you know I'll go back to the whole idea, and it's something I've been thinking about more and more, and not I hadn't acknowledged in a long time, or maybe I never really fully acknowledged it, but I did. There was a portion, a pretty large portion of my career where I felt ashamed of being a career male executive assistant.
Mm,
And I think being able to um, create a business and leverage my entrepreneurial pursuits um, through something that at a point, there was a point where I even felt ashamed about,
mhm,
um, I'm proud of, you know? And so being able to part ways, or I was let go of my role at the healthcare network, and then um, taking the risk, reimagining what our executive assistant careers could be, and turning that into a business. I mean, it's that's why these last 5 years, although the first three were really tough, just because there's a lot of stress, and I wasn't used to the fact that when you own a business and things are going well, you can still feel a high amount of stress. I'm getting much more used to that now, and the fact that we have a growing we have a family. Not growing the family anymore, but all the expenses and everything that goes along with that.
mhm.
You really want to get above a certain revenue level with a certain EBITDA number to meet your needs and all of that. Um, but the last couple of years, being able to do that has been uh, has been the highlight, I think. And I'm really excited about where we're going, because I think there's a lot to offer a lot of other people who are in our position, or were in our position, or what have you, and get to that place where, work life balance, and you're putting your time where you want, and you feel value in what you do. And yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, yeah. I think definitely part of you being who you are, you kind of built an entire atmosphere of like education, but hospitality and helping others. And earlier on when I had said startups, I think like you're like the person that startup founders should reach out to first. They may think they may need developers, they may think they need funding, but obviously getting organized and having someone to have their back and guiding them on that journey is really what founders really need.
Yeah. I do say though, we do play in the high end of the sandbox, if you will, and I would not want a startup founder who has a limited runway to I would want to feel like they have, I would want to see what other options may get what they need, as opposed to paying $3,000 a month for an executive assistant through us. Um, I just, I was speaking to someone earlier today, and I said, look, we really want to see, if it's a really small business or a solopreneur business. I mean, comfortably, I'd like to see 500,000 plus of revenue
Mm,
to justify a $3,000 a month spend on anything, frankly. Um, I do think that the executive assistant, or some sort of assistant support for a founder, should be one of your first hires.
mm,
There's no doubt about it. It's just about what is best.
mm,
And if you're a startup founder and you just landed seed funding, and you landed $1.4 million in seed funding, and you have a runway of a year, yeah, we probably would be a really good fit for you, because you're going to get a lot of bandwidth out of our assistant, and you're going to create that relationship. They're going to be there from the beginning. They're going to be creating the standard operating procedures for the office, for the business. That no brainer. But if you are starting a business that is developing a piece of software, and you're not going to be hitting revenue until a year and a half from now, it's
mhm,
probably not the right time. Um, it does us no good to force ourselves into a client or business situation where we're not somewhat confident that it's going to have legs, And when I mean that, I mean being with them for 9, 12, 14, 16 months, what have you, because of the effort needed to really make a great relationship happen um, between executive and assistant in that onboarding process. And we front load that. And that first month, we don't consider part of our 1/3 resources. And so a lot of times an assistant will go way over resourced on that first month, but that's okay. We're taking that risk on ourselves, being that we're going to be efficient, that we're going to be integrated, and we're just getting to know you. And so all those, we take all that into consideration. Frankly, though, back in 2019 and 2020, we would take anyone that came
Yeah.
and wanted to pay us and go. But we're realizing that sometimes no is the answer that needs to be said for both parties. And it's gratifying a couple of times
Mhm.
throughout our history. I've said no, and then 8 months goes by and it turns into a yes.
Mhm.
And a no is never a no. It's, if you treat someone with respect and honesty and openness, no is always a maybe later. And so yeah,
Yeah.
and again, when you say startup, the definition is so wide nowadays that, I was talking to a person, they're like, yeah, we work a startup. I'm like, oh, really? When did you guys start? 15 years ago. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a personal thing. And there's cachet, there's cachet in it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate you delivering all the value that you delivered today. I think the audience that's listening right now, I think that not only did they could feel the emotional connection that you were talking about earlier on, but they could also see that your due diligence and what you do and how you do it is a profound theory in comparison to other assistants out there in the world. So I definitely appreciate you for that. So on the flip side of it, when I do these interviews, I like to close out by giving whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to become the host of my show. So then now you could interview me. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
Well, it's just thoroughly impressive on how much work you put into what you're doing now. I guess if you were to look at yourself 5 years from now, what would be what would you consider what would be, I don't want to say the word success, because I feel like you are successful, but what would make you happy, where seeing you 5 years from now, in terms of where you are with your business?
Hmm. And I'm happy you asked that question because I always work 12 months out. Like the reason why the podcast is where it is because of what I did 12 months before. So I'm really working on things into 2024 right now. So going down the road for 5 years, I would think to your point that you made earlier about all the content that I'm putting out and all this different information, creating the system for that is what I've been developing the entire time. So probably going more into a software space of mine, right? To kind of be more of a founder, but still doing interviews with like-minded individuals. That's where I see myself 5 years from now. On a like I'm global now, but more of a larger footprint. It's cool to interview people across the world, but what does it really look like to contact 3 million people or 30 million or 300 million people that are listening to this and getting feedback and learning from you and learning from other entrepreneurs and using that inspiration as their jumping boards?
So all of, because the deep dive research on me that you did,
Mhm.
um, a lot of that is software based.
Potentially it can be. I mean, I have a system now. So to like literally that onboarding form is the first point of my system. So like again, all the data that's why I've chosen to cancel appointments if they don't fill out the form. Because without the form, it takes me so much longer to find that data. And then once I have access to the data points, then I can go into them and do a bunch of due diligence. Prime example with Stephanie, well, once I figured out that Stephanie was your wife and she was also the author and she was the co-founder, then I almost pre-interviewed her as much as I interviewed you. And that's when I found out about the kids. If I didn't do that, I never would have known about the kids. You see what I'm saying? Because I think in your page there was some information there, but it wasn't as deep dive as hers were about the kids.
No, cool. Very cool. But you must have seen a video on Facebook of Wyatt playing piano
On her page. And that's what
on
I'm saying.
her page, on
If
her
I didn't
page.
go down the extra steps, I never would have had that bit of information. And I knew that right away you were musically inclined based upon your information. So I was looking
Right.
for a common denominator. And then when I saw him playing on the piano, I was like, there it is. That's the
That's
common
sweet.
denominator. So
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, you put a smile on my face. I really appreciate that.
yeah, well, I definitely appreciate it. I mean, I think like having an opportunity to tell your story, and I think we could, now I understand why Joe Rogan's episodes are like 5 hours long because you start to get into this conversation, you're telling story, and there's so many things that I wanted to talk about. Like we didn't even talk about the Bills. Like I mean, you're a huge Buffalo Bills fan, and
Go
you wrote
Bills, man.
about it. So it was just kind of like, yeah, like all this other things we could talk about that we didn't even have opportunity to get to yet.
That's okay. It'll happen.
Yep. Yeah, well, I definitely appreciate you. I think the audience appreciates you. I think you delivered a lot of different value, not only for us, but you deliver value for your clients on a regular day basis. And just for that, from entrepreneur to entrepreneur, I definitely appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
S.A. Grant.